So if I've timed this right, this video will be released exactly 1 year after the end of Bill Hader's Barry on HBO. Barry was a 4-season show about an ex-military man, Barry Berkman, now working as a hitman for his family friend Monroe Fuchs, as well as other associates such as NoHo Hank. That is, until he becomes disillusioned with his job and considers becoming an actor with acting teacher Gene Cousineau and Barry's on-and-off girlfriend Sally Reed. However, balancing aspiring actor and ruthless hitman is obviously very difficult for Barry, and hijinks ensue. Until those hijinks get really fucked up and disturbing, and then the show kinda stops being as funny. I've now had my time to reflect on my feelings about the show, and I like it. I liked it the whole way through, even if it wasn't always to the same degree. Even with its flaws, it's got constantly improving direction, witty writing, great casting, and more than makes up for anything it lacks. When this was on, it was just a great time, as we got to see a guy reinvent his style in real time, while being incredibly open to interviews and explanations about his process. If there's one thing I love about content, it's a great and new thing coming from an unexpected place. There's just something that hits about a person delving into a new realm and knocking it out of the park first try. So today, we're going to give the show its deserved attention with a ranking of all 32 episodes from all 4 seasons. This is a huge task, and I'm an amateur at covering so much at once. Only other time I've done something like this was when I rambled about the season 4 episodes of Succession for 40 minutes, unscripted, about a year ago, which is crazy. Even with a script this time, and a big one at that, I'll be kind of going all over the place with my commentary, and it's going to be much harder to follow if you haven't seen the show. Plus, I'll be spoiling, of course, so really, check it out. If you want to come back to this video after watching an episode, there will be spoiler timestamps in the description for the placement of each episode. Despite how much I do want to praise this show, we've got to start at the bottom, of course, so let's get into number 32. Number 32. Season 1, Episode 2. Use It. It's tough to say that the second ever episode of a show consisting of 32 episodes is the worst, but I think it's true. Barry Season 1 is far from the best, especially the first half, and Use It doesn't do much for me. There's still fun to be had here, iconic moments to be enjoyed, such as the scene of Fuchs getting attacked by the Chechens in the background of a scene where the foreground is Barry and Sally having a calm phone call, but my biggest issue with this episode is how little it progresses the plot, despite it coming so early. This is going to be something I bring up a lot towards the bottom, being an episode feeling unimportant. Arguably, the main plot is Sally and Barry's plan to perform doubt, which is just kind of weird and uncomfortable, and then it never even happens, feeling very anticlimactic. Plus, while you get some fun stuff with Hank and Goran hiring Barry to take out Paco, he doesn't do that in this episode. It's mostly just setup, and not even very integral setup that you absolutely need to see. The strongest part of the episode is likely Ryan Madison, Barry's target from episode 1's dad's speech, which becomes important 2 seasons later, but it's not enough to carry this one out of the 32 spot. It is surprisingly skippable despite being only episode 2. I don't have this visceral hatred for it, it's just not that interesting. Number 31. Season 1, Episode 4. Commit to You. If you ask me what the show's worst episode was after my first watch, I'd say it was this one, but I think that's a little unfair. Commit to You has a lot of setup too, but this stuff is more needed for overarching storylines. This episode introduces Chris and Taylor, as well as beginning the Cousineau-Moss romance that is impactful throughout the entire show. It's an episode used to its fullest potential, filled up with character-defining plots right before shit goes wild. But the thing is, none of them are that good. Sally's scene with her manager making unrequited sexual advances towards her, later leading to her breaking down in her car, just feels out of place. It's an honest and fair criticism of Hollywood, but it's also tossed in between scenes of 70-year-old Henry Winkler acting sexy and 2 military guys headbutting each other. I guess the way to connect all of that would be that it's about toxic masculinity, which is a big part of the show, but it feels like a dumbed-down version of it that isn't a very unique experience that'll leave an imprint on you. The same goes for the party scene where Barry forces Sally to stop talking to this random guy who never shows up again. This just doesn't introduce anything new to me, and it just feels sort of out of nowhere for the place his character is currently in. Later on, I think it would make more sense. Commit to You may be a more vital episode, but it's a super forgetful one. Number 30. Season 2, Episode 2, The Power of No. This might be the episode I have the least to say about. During The Power of No, it essentially feels like we're getting through the less important and less interesting parts of plots that will eventually become fun to watch, like Gene's connections with his son, Leo, or Sally's past with her ex-husband, Sam. All of these things are just better in other entries. I do really enjoy the Hank and Barry interactions, though, and that last scene of Barry not being able to kill Esther is great. Not a bad episode, but another one where I had to look up what went down to remember. Number 29. Season 4, Episode 1. Yikes. Well, here we go. The very first thing I ever reviewed on my channel, back when I didn't have a mic or a script. This is also the start of my hate on Season 4, which will continue to be a thing throughout this whole video, and it is also the first season premiere, a type of episode that Barry usually struggles with. The season premieres often are in with the weaker episodes of the season, and Yikes is just plain boring. Barry is in prison, so there's not much for him to do. It instantly makes you feel like we should have ended with Season 3, because there's so little for Barry to do, that Bill Hader decides to have him start hallucinating other places so that they can get him out of that setting. Other plots are quickly switched up too, like Sally, who was going to go back home at the end of Season 3, but then spends one episode there getting annoyed with her parents before returning immediately. Then there's Fuchs, who also kinda has nothing to do besides walk around prison screaming, so we just repeat the same plot from Season 2 where Fuchs wears a wire to get Barry to confess more about his crimes. The saving grace of this episode, and the saving grace of Season 4, is 100% the directing. Every scene where Barry is sad and fucked up, which is just every scene he's in Season 4, looks fantastic, especially those hallucinations I mentioned. But with the visual style being the only thing piquing my interest, it starts to kind of feel like Bill Hader is just using this episode and a lot of this season to test his experiments before implementing them elsewhere. Even if it's not the truth, the feeling itself drags down my enjoyment. Yikes is an episode where not a lot happens, in fact, possibly negative things happen, we actually kind of go backwards, but hey, at least they look good doing it. Number 28. Season 4, Episode 5. Tricky Legacies. So this is probably the most controversial episode of the whole show. You want to see nothing happening? Well, here's an episode which includes a scene where Barry stands outside with a gun for like a minute or two, and then goes back inside, and that's the whole scene. After a random 8-year time jump, Barry has escaped prison and is now living under a different name with Sally and their kid, who they must have had immediately, attempting to avoid the police and anyone who could report him. This is a very experimental one. Scenes often feature no music and sparse editing to make everything seem uncomfortable and off-putting. And once again, the technical aspects are fantastic, but the story is all over the place, with this 8-year time jump feeling super rushed and ridiculous even after a year of sitting with it. And if we're being honest, there's really not much to get out of 30 minutes of uneventful family time in the middle of the desert. It really does feel like the goofiness of Seasons 1 and 2 has been lost in the sauce. It's such a different show, and I can't get behind it. I'm not a fan of Tricky Legacies. Number 27. Season 4, Episode 2. Bestest Place on the Earth. Let's keep the Season 4 hate train going. Another episode of Barry doing a whole lot of not much. However, it is top 10 sequels better than the original, mostly because this one features character actor Patrick Fischler. Let's go. With this being the third episode too, already on the list, I feel like you can start to understand that these tend to be disappointing. Bestest Place on the Earth really just feels like the second part of the first episode, which might be why the two were premiered together. Some of the events of this episode, like Gene meeting with Lon O'Neill, I just remember as being from the first one. So for the sake of simplicity, and not dragging out a review where I'll essentially just be repeating myself, I'll tell you that I found this one very forgettable, but I enjoyed the Dave and Buster scene. Number 26. Season 2, Episode 6. The Truth Has a Ring to It. Coming right after one of the show's most legendary episodes, Ronnie/Lily, Episode 6 is a pretty strange one, feeling like an intersection between the middle and end of the season where they couldn't introduce new elements, but they'd kind of ended the old ones, so you end up with Fuchs tripping over his shoelaces in the woods for like 3 scenes. Don't get me wrong, those scenes are funny, but they probably could have been condensed down to like 1, and the extra unneeded parts are noticeable when you have just 30 minutes to get through everything. The best and most iconic part of this episode is Barry's frightening performance portraying Sam and Sally's play, and I also enjoy Hank's shenanigans when still trying to kill Esther, even if they haven't reached their peak. But The Truth Has a Ring to It is one of those episodes where, if you told me the title, I'd probably have to think for a second about what even takes place in it. Like, Season 1, Episode 5, Do Your Job. That's when Barry and Taylor raid the stash house. Season 3, Episode 4, All the Sauces, Barry blows up Fernando's house to save Cristobal. Season 2, Episode 6, The Truth Has a Ring to It. I can't quite put my finger on it. Number 25, Season 3, Episode 3, Ben Mendelsohn. You haven't been talking to the cops now, have you, mate? Season 3 has arrived. There's a lot I like about Episode 3. All of Barry and Jean's scenes are incredible. This is the one where Jean finally realizes that he inadvertently caused Janice Moss's death, and he lashes out at Barry on set, slapping him. Those are some great moments. However, the subplots haven't really gotten off the ground yet. Fuchs, by this point, is still in Chechnya hiding from Barry, and I'm sure many watching would react to that with, "Oh yeah, I forgot he did that." Additionally, Sally's plot is very minimal as we wait for the consequences of Barry's outburst at her in Episode 2 to take effect in Episode 4. Ben Mendelsohn is an enjoyable episode, but with the amount that happens in practically every episode afterwards, it's the one in Season 3 that you kinda wish could be removed so we could get into the big shit sooner. Like, maybe Fuchs could have started his revenge empire here instead of waiting. Or maybe Katie, Sally's co-star played by Evil Paddington, could go straight to her and tell her that Barry is abusive, leaving her more time to reflect on those words. Overall, I like it, but I don't love it. What's next? Number 24, Season 4, Episode 6, The Wizard. Now this is the first Season 4 episode on the list that I can fully say I like. I like this episode. It's the second in the time skip quartet and the first to show us Fuchs and Hank. And let me tell you, this episode gets moving fast. Fuchs gets out of prison and meets Hank, then tells him to kill Barry, then points out that he killed Cristobal, and by the end of the episode their gangs are at war. Really had to make up for the amount of time they'd been given. On Barry's side of things, he kinda just spends the whole episode traveling to Jean's house to kill him. Also, he's Christian now, and he listens to Christian podcasts until he gets a Bill Burr voice cameo that justifies killing, which honestly I find really funny even if Barry's sudden devotion to Christianity is pretty random. I mean, it's kind of hinted at, but it's such a big part of his character now. Cousineau's plot for this episode is kinda just laying the pieces for the big twist in the next episode, so it's kinda just whatever. But Sally's is honestly fantastic. This is the episode containing probably the biggest directorial achievement of this whole last run of episodes, and definitely the most talked about, being the scene in which Sally hallucinates a home invader, a guy named fucking Bevel, attacking her. It's a terrifying scene, and it really shows how much Bill Hader has grown as a filmmaker. But the thing is, the episode still isn't that funny, and as I was implying with Fuchs and Hank, it feels very rushed. The showrunners had 4 episodes to make an entire new plot and end it, and they spent one of them doing fuck all, so they had to speed things up, and The Wizard is the biggest victim of that. Still enjoyable though. Number 23, Season 1, Episode 1, Make Your Mark. The very first episode of an entire show is usually not the best one, and that is the case with Barry, but at least it got me to keep watching. The issue with Make Your Mark is that the show is just underdeveloped. Sally and the other acting students partying and being really interested in Barry's life is just weird because most of these people end up being completely insignificant even though they act like best friends. Or you could mention Hank, who was meant to only be in this episode, meaning that nothing he really does matters at all. But most vitally there's Barry, who is just a very regular guy. His whole thing is that he's an utterly emotionless person and a terrible actor, which isn't super interesting to watch knowing how things will play out. Barry's inability to conversate typically doesn't come from antisocialness, but rather his failure at acting like a normal person in social scenarios. The Season 2 version of him that tries to get the acting class going again at the worst time is much more what I'd expect. This is the only episode of the series where it feels accurate to give him the nickname Barry Block. Also, I just personally think that Barry being a bad actor isn't that funny, but that's just me. The strongest aspects of this episode are mostly towards the end. Barry's monologue to Jean is unbelievably important throughout the entire show, giving a lot of context to Barry and Fuchs' characters, as well as providing insight to the timeline before the series, which we don't get a lot of. The short shootout right after with the Chechens who kill Ryan Madison is intense and well done too. Plus, with some funny moments with Hank early on, this isn't an unenjoyable premiere. It gets a lot done in its half an hour that won't be leaving my mind. But that middle chunk could be better. Number 22, Season 3, Episode 5, Crazy Time Shit Show. This is a hell of an episode, and it really lives up to its title, possibly too much. I'll start by pointing out my favorite sequence in the episode being the scenes where the Chechen base is raided and Cristobal is kidnapped by his Bolivian family. The first section, where the cops and the Bolivians raid the place at the same time, is successful comedically, meaning in simpler terms, it made me laugh. But then the scene of Hank hiding in the closet while Cristobal is stolen is genuinely so nerve-wracking and sad. Fantastic sequence, really love it. Gene's plot here begins his quest to save his reputation by meeting up with the actual Joe Mantegna for dinner, and it's nice. This is where we're introduced to Annie, the director he blackballed, but it's nothing special. Same with Sally's plot with her show getting cancelled. At least the scene with Natalie in the bathroom is very sweet. At the tail end of the episode, you get Barry attempting to apologize to Sally by promising to traumatize the woman who cancelled her show, and that scene includes my favorite line of the episode, replace her dog with a slightly different dog. I think that scene is great, but what comes afterwards with the wife and the son of Barry's first victim royally fucking up and never being seen again is kind of annoying to me. It's funny, sure, but those two were the first recruits of Fuchs' empire and had a whole intro scene devoted to them, only to be disposed of immediately. This episode just went a bit too crazy for its own good. Number 21, Season 2, Episode 7, The Audition. This is a rare occurrence of the penultimate episode of a season not being one of the best. The Audition is a funny episode for sure. This one has Sally's rant where she talks for like 2 minutes straight with no cuts, which is sandwiched in between Barry's shit pie line. And if that's not enough, there's the Hank scene where he says, "I'm optometrist by nature." How is this episode not great? Well, the thing is, it doesn't feel like the penultimate one. Despite how much I love Ronnie/Lily, the worst thing it did was mess with the pacing of Season 2's second half. During this episode, you get scenes of Sally meeting insane people in the filmmaking business, which would usually be Episode 3 material, and Barry's entire Jay Roach subplot, which is honestly completely useless. It is funny, but this is basically the last time in the whole show where Barry pursues acting, at least as a serious thing and not just a ploy, and it's a Jay Roach movie about a lifeguard shitting in a pie that he decides to drop spontaneously. However, the way that the episode leaves off with Cousineau being shown Janice Moss's body, that's great. What this episode needed was a little bit of adjustment to include more of Fuchs and Cousineau, which is really the only important thing going on. The first instance of the name Kenneth Goulet, Fuchs's art vandalay, if you will, is a big win though. I'll give them that. Number 20, Season 1, Episode 3, Make the Unsafe Choice. This is the episode that I always forget is as good as it is. Boring Season 1 subplots are still here for sure. Sally finding out that another girl she previously worked with is involved with her movie is pretty whatever to me, and I believe this is the first example of Barry's Season 1 daydreams, which are all really weird, but what this one has that other episodes don't is 2 separate, well-written scenes that pull at my heartstrings. Hank and Goron bringing in a legendary assassin that's just some random old guy is an inherently funny concept, and the line where Stovka reveals he's actually 45 makes me laugh every time, but the rest of his scene with Fuchs and his eventual suicide get to me. My whole life ever since a child is death is a chilling line. A rewatch convinced me that this isn't just an example of Stephen Root chewing the scenery, it's actually a depressing moment that is in line with a lot of the show's themes. The Paco killing that's built up to with Hank's stupid-ass bitmojis is sad as hell too, mostly because of how messy it feels. If Barry had just sniped the guy as planned, it'd be like nothing, but he has to strangle him. Make the Unsafe Choice is still placed in one of the least interesting periods of the show, early Season 1, and it isn't fantastic, but it really is better than I remember. It helps to build the intensity after Episode 2 slowed down a bit. It deserves to be in the top 20. Also, Goron is great in this episode. Number 19. Season 2, Episode 3, Past equals Present times Future over Yesterday. This is, of course, the King of Suckballs Mountain episode, and that scene, as well as the entirety of the Hank plot, is the peak of the episode. It's just comedic gold, and it also begins a season-long storyline that leads all the way to the finale, introducing the character of Meyerbeck. Nothing else is fantastic, but it's all solid enough. You get more of Gene and Leo, which becomes a more enjoyable plot each episode, and the first appearance of Sam directly after Barry and Sally attempt and fail to act out Sally's past experience with him. Sam's development in just 2 episodes is super well done, but that's mostly due to the one after this. In this, he kinda just stands around. Overall, Past equals Present is just really fun to watch. It doesn't have a whole lot going on, but this show used to be a comedy, and it was good at it. Like, I always forget that this one opens with Hank dreaming about being interviewed by Thomas Friedman, because that's a concept you simply would not see in the later seasons of the show. This one ain't flawless, but it's got a special place in my heart. Number 18. Season 3, Episode 1, Forgiving Jeff. Forgiving Jeff was a huge turning point for Barry, being the premiere of the season that would basically tell you, yeah, things are rough now. The The places each character have ended up in are super interesting. Sally is now famous for her show Joplin, and you get to see her have her 15 minutes of fame before it inevitably and obviously comes crashing down. That shot of her walking through the various parts of her set is iconic for a reason. Meanwhile, Fuchs and Hank are suspects for the shooting at the monastery in Season 2's finale, so Hank gets brought in for questioning, and gives Fuchs the name The Raven, which weirdly enough becomes important. Also, he's gay now and is dating Cristobal. Hopefully nothing bad happens to them. And then there's Barry. I'll start with my main critique. Barry isn't an actor anymore. As I said during the audition summary, he kinda just stops being an actor here, and it's a bit weird. But with the state he's in, it makes sense. Barry's hallucinations of shooters killing the people he loves are actually fucking terrifying, especially when there's one directly on Cousineau in a moment where it seems like he's about to die. The directing style and Bill Hader's acting were already good, but they're both about to skyrocket. Another slight problem I had with the episode that was really just left over from Season 2 was making it so that Cousineau knows Barry is a murderer. I was pretty worried that this would result in Barry's normal guy life being shattered too quickly and too suddenly, which ended up sorta being true. This episode didn't really sell me on that shift being a good idea, but don't worry, because the one after it does. Still a small mark against this episode, but I do think it's a great premiere nonetheless. Number 17. Season 4, Episode 4. It Takes a Psycho. So this might be a slightly controversial choice, as this is one of the most acclaimed episodes of its season, but I don't absolutely love it. This is the one that chooses to not feature Barry at all until the last few minutes, which is an interesting choice that I believe was made to let the subplots have more time to finish before the big flash forward, but they're still rushed. In the previous episode, Sally is given a protege of sorts who is mentally abused by her in hopes of gaining the same energy as Jean. That girl later decides to stick around despite Sally's behavior towards her, still wanting to pursue her dreams anyways. In this episode, she gets a role in a movie called Mega Girls, and then is never seen again. Well, we do see her on a poster for Mega Girls 8 in the future, so I guess things went well. The more talked about plot, however, is the Hank one, which is acted phenomenally and makes me deeply sad, but holy shit, this came out of nowhere. Over the span of 30 minutes, and obviously it's actually less since they're not always on screen, Cristobal and Hank meet with random guys who want to join their gang. Hank kills those guys. Cristobal finds out that Hank is planning to rejoin the Chechens with his old friend Batir, denies the offer, breaks up with Hank, and then is killed by the Chechens. To be honest, all of this is the time skip's fault, even if it hasn't happened yet. This is the last chance the writers have to tie up storylines which have been going on for multiple seasons, and it's just not enough time. Everything crammed into It Takes a Psycho is wonderful, but it really makes me think that this season would have been better as 10 episodes split into halves of 5 so that we could have let this half cook for a little longer before wrapping up. Number 16. Season 4, Episode 8. Wow. The series finale. The end of it all. There's so much going on here, and right off the bat I have an issue with it. They didn't bring back the theme music. Up until, I believe, the penultimate episode of Season 3, there's that nice bit with the intro. Season 3 gets creative with it though. In the finale, they replace the theme with a soundbite from a later scene. In Season 4, they don't use it a single time, and still not bringing it back for the series finale makes it feel like the energy of the show has been greatly depleted. A lot of my issues with this episode stem from that kind of thing, how it feels like it's forgotten where it came from. Hank being shot dead while remembering the traumatic killing of his partner is such a far cry from his usual goofy self, and while that could be interesting, it's just off-putting because he constantly switches between this disturbed mafia boss and a fucking circus clown. He literally tripped and fell down a hill in the last episode after trying to shoot a missile at Fuchs. This direction for the show made it much less enjoyable, going from a series that would comfortably be called more than half comedy to the most depressing shit, and it kinda sucks that they never bring it back to its old ways at all. The episode is still very impressive with its direction. The final shot of Fuchs fading into the darkness is great, and so is the ending for Fuchs in general, actually. I think it's very earned. Cousineau's ending is pretty interesting, Sally's is okay but repetitive. However, Barry's death is another thing that bothers me. I always felt like Barry being sentenced to life in prison was a far more fitting end to his character. At the start of the show, he is attempting to leave a life of crime and become a normal guy with normal friends and a normal job, but finds that to be incredibly difficult and steps on innocent people to get there. so the biggest loss this character could suffer would be to be publicly shamed as a criminal and not be able to see these people that he's hurt anymore. Barry kind of winning in the end feels like a really edgy and strange conclusion. He's not even some genius mastermind, he's a dumbass who just wandered into being the hero of the people. This is definitely the right ending for religious Barry, a person who spawned in for the last 4 episodes of the show, but considering everything else, it really should have ended with Season 3, and I will follow up on that later. Number 15. Season 1, Episode 6. Listen with your ears, react with your face. In the last 3 episodes of a Barry season, things tend to start ramping up, and that definitely happened here as we get our first major character deaths. Moss's shootout with Vacha, the Chechen who attempts to kidnap Sally, is super intense, and is another one of those moments similar to Barry's killing of Lucky the Hitman in the first episode, that showed that the show could do a dramatic, frightening gunfight. This is also probably one of my favorite Janice Moss moments. The come down from the episode before is great. I'm happy they snuck in that scene with Hank and Goran surveying the stash house, because Goran, this is great physical comedy of you, is one of the funniest deliveries of the entire season. Barry refusing to kill Taylor is very in line with his traits at the time, but of course, Taylor being Barry's partner can't last long, so after leaving behind some of the biggest evidence of Barry's crimes, the money he got from them, right in the acting class, it's time for him to die. He invites Barry, another buddy of his, and Chris from episode 4 to bum rush the Bolivians that Hank and Goran are hoping to kill. Barry, being the only one understanding what's about to happen and desperately yelling, is nail-bitingly anxious. No matter how loud he screams, though, Taylor and his buddy get shot up in the front seat, setting up episode 7, which, spoilers, is one of my favorites of the entire show. Not a whole lot to say about this one, as it's probably the least action-packed of Season 1's second half, but it's impressive and vigorous. Getting to the big shit now. Number 14. Season 2, Episode 1. The show must go on. Probably. This is easily my favorite of all the premieres, and that's simply for the comedy. This episode is funny as fuck. The opening sequence where Fuchs attempts to replace Barry with a terrible hitman that instantly gets himself killed is hysterical. Later, there's the Lululemon scene where Hank wears a dumbass wig to talk to Barry, all taking place after Hank's goofy voiceover of him and the Bolivians becoming best buds. This premiere is just good fun. The most dramatically impressive part, though, has to be Barry's description of the 2 men he killed back in Afghanistan. This is one of the first bits of info we get about Barry's military past, and I believe the first scene we see of it. The celebration of Barry's talented shooting juxtaposed with the actors portraying it as if it was this terrifying thing that caused him to break down crying makes you realize that this show still has it. Even if Barry takes a big break from killing in Season 2, his psyche as a killer is still developed. I love Barry's expression after we cut away from the flashback and he's just left to process his past for a second. Great Bill Hader performance. All around, a fantastic episode with a great cliffhanger ending, where Loach discovers that Barry is the shooter on Hank's lipstick camera, and we're thrown right back into the action. This is the first episode on this list that I have almost no issues with. It's just incredible. Number 13. Season 3, Episode 2, Limonada. Despite this one only being episode 2, it's as chaotic as they come, as Barry has Jean in the trunk of his car for much of the 28-minute runtime. And as I said earlier, this is the one that convinced me that revealing Barry's true self to Jean was a good idea, and it did it in the cold open. I had been scared that a person knowing Barry is a criminal would instantly cause Barry to lose all of his friends when the secret inevitably gets out, but the minute we see Barry give Jean his food and he asks to ride up front, you realize 2 things. 1, Barry has the power, so he isn't going to be exposed. And 2, Jean just isn't that type of character. Still though, by the end you get the obvious solution of Barry threatening Jean's family, doing it in the most creepy way possible, and making it clear that he has just entirely lost it. Limonada has some of the best of unhinged Barry, as earlier in the episode you have his freak out at Sally, which has great effects throughout the rest of the season, and is even called back to. Great job from both Bill and Sarah Goldberg. While this is all going on, Hank's peaceful life with Cristobal is ruined again when Cristobal's father-in-law Fernando shows up. And he really does just show up. He comes out of nowhere and almost runs Cristobal over. Not too much happens with that in this episode, but it does spark a season-long storyline for the boys that eventually gets a little unsettling. Limonada is a well-balanced entry, ranging from intense verbal assault to Jean getting assaulted by just so many dogs. I loved it a lot, and while Forgiving Jeff got me excited for Season 3, this is the episode that got me really hyped. Everything is thrown into disarray, everything is chaos, and that's Season 3. Number 12. Season 1, Episode 5. Do Your Job. Alright, I'll level with you. There's really only a few scenes in this one that are carrying it all the way up to this spot. Because there are issues here. First of all, something I've barely mentioned with Season 1 that I always thought was weird were those strange hallucinations Barry gets of him and Sally in the future. There's more than one in this episode, and they're awkward every time due to the fact that they sort of just stop happening after the next episode, and I never remember that they once existed. Also, by this point, I wasn't really that into Sally and her relationship with Barry. The continuation of the sudden end it has in episode 4 is pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of things, but I can't help it, man. This is the Stash House raid. Taylor is a dumbass character, but he can shoot guys well, and even if we don't see some of it, this shit is raw. No soundtrack, very little dialogue, just the music in the stash house and occasional shooting. One of the few times in the show where a scene feels more like action than drama or comedy. And of course, Taylor's Leroy Jenkins moment is incredible. I respect the insane level of commitment that guy has. Another great moment of the episode is Barry's moral dilemma in the acting class over if killing a person makes you evil. Barry's desperate attempts to come up with a reason that it isn't without revealing himself are played perfectly, and the class's determination that he is talking about his military experiences, leading to Kusino saying that killing outside of war makes you a psycho, is a funny bit, but deeply depressing knowing how it only fuels Barry's fear of this topic more. It's a super important scene for the rest of the show, as is any scene that concerns Barry's fucked up, twisted mind. His thoughts on what's right and what's wrong continue to warp as he has to kill innocents and friends in order to protect himself, and a lot of it stems from this argument that he has that Lady Macbeth is more evil than Macbeth is. He's scared of his own evil, so he can't accept it, and lets it worsen. Awesome episode, being the first truly great one of the whole series, in my opinion. Number 11. Season 3, Episode 4. All the sauces. So, this is the one getting snubbed from the top 10, but that doesn't mean it's not amazing. All the Sauces has a ton going on in every plotline. This is such an eventful episode because that classic moment where a character who thinks they have their life pieced together has the rug pulled out from under them happens to nearly everybody at some point during this 30 minutes. Hank and Cristobal are still dealing with Fernando, who is at his best here. It really is impressive that Miguel Sandoval was able to create such a fully formed and memorable villain within 3 episodes, but it's time for him to go, and he goes down hard. Hank hires Barry and convinces him to use an actively beeping bomb to do the job, which allows for a hell of a straight man role for Bill Hader, and later, a super nervy execution of the hit. Like, it's funny that the bomb is beeping all the time, but god is it frightening. Fernando's last scene before he gets taken out is great. He finally reveals that he is aware of Hank and Cristobal's relationship, and he's mad, but never discreetly homophobic, which would have been an easy way out. Instead, he treats it like Romeo and Juliet, and instructs Cristobal to kill Hank himself. Just as Cristobal runs out of the house, the bomb goes off, killing everybody still inside. Hell of a conclusion to something that's only beginning. This is far and away the best the first half of Season 3 had to offer, and many parts of it are sitting in my mind constantly. At the same time, Sally accepts an award for Joplin, her show during Season 3, in an emotional yet anxiety-inducing speech scene that Sarah Goldberg perfects. I just can't stop complimenting her. When Katie, her co-star, makes her aware of her troubled relationship with Barry afterwards, I appreciate how you can see the denial slowly leave her until she's more done with her boyfriend than anyone else. It's also a super creative use of Katie, a character who kinda stops being important here, but had a solid few episodes in the spotlight. Barry, post-explosion, is ready to get back to his regular life again for like the 7 billionth time. He pays off Kusino to get him to never speak about him again and promises to leave his family alone, an offer which Gene dutifully accepts. I love how genuinely scared of Barry Gene is by now. It makes me, in turn, scared of him too. Barry then speaks to Sally, who quickly breaks things off with him, instantly bringing him down a peg from the high he just reached about 20 seconds ago. The diagram of highs and lows in just Season 3 Episode 4 looks like a heart monitor, and it's kind of incredible. It certainly leaves everybody in very interesting places and mindsets for the last 4 episodes of Season 3, which happen to be absolute unexplainable chaos. I like this one being a mix of a lot of things. It's got drama with those last 2 scenes of Barry with Gene and Sally, comedy from this surreal customer service call that might be illegal but doesn't act like it, and action from, well, the bomb. Plus there's Fuchs setting up his revenge gang, initiating a long-running storyline that goes so many different places I wouldn't have dreamed the show would go while watching Season 1. This one doesn't have any single scene that I can point to and say is a definitive favorite for the whole show or anything like that. It's just good fun, and very rewatchable. It's a shame it's not as good as... Season 4, Episode 3, You're charming. This is the Season 4 episode to be brave and say, okay, we need things to happen now. Due to that decision, this is the one where Barry breaks out of prison. But meanwhile, Sally starts up her acting class and finds out that it might not be the greatest idea to take advice from the guy who spends this whole episode breaking into a reporter's house and accidentally turning him German. That happens due to Jim Moss, a character who is so good that all of his important episodes are even further up than this. I enjoy how this disaster is a mix of Gene's teaching style being genuinely outdated and Sally misunderstanding it. Even Gene wasn't as harsh on Barry as Sally is on this girl who she just met. Everything she does here she rushes into without thinking because by now Sally is desperate to find something she's passionate about that can also distract her, essentially as an escape, and fast. Luckily, one girl takes pity on her and decides to become her protege for one whole episode. Oh, and before I move on, I gotta mention the nice touch of the motocross guy that she killed sitting in the back row at her theater. Season 4 does have an attention to detail that cannot be overlooked. But who am I kidding? The best part of this episode, by a long shot, is Barry's escape from prison. Hank and Cristobal hire an assassin duo through big man Guillermo del Toro to take out Barry in prison. The duo also runs a podcast where they review gadgets that usually do not work. Fred Armisen cameos as one half of the duo, and after a minute or so of standing in the back of the room looking like no man ever has, he attempts to kill Barry with a pen gun that promptly explodes in his hand. The other member of the duo, Choi, whose name you heard at the beginning of this placement, fires into the room, killing all 4 witness protection agents before being shot by Barry in the season's first incredibly exciting action sequence. This whole ending just gave me so much energy. It's unbelievably hilarious and intense at the same time, a perfect mix that Season 4 rarely managed to balance, but when there's a win, there's a win, and this certainly is one. This time I truly came out of the episode thinking, I can't wait to see what happens next.
What?
Season 2, Episode 4. What? This one relies almost entirely on a single plotline. Sally's ex-husband Sam is back in town, and we have to develop him as fast as possible before he leaves the show forever. He also happens to be around just when Barry and Sally are acting out his abuse on stage, making things very uncomfortable. Sam as a character is super fleshed out, and Joe Massengill, his actor, plays a big part in that. You don't feel bad for him, of course, because, well, he's a big piece of shit. He's a gross womanizer, physically and emotionally abusive, and can't handle criticism. However, he's well written enough that you understand why Sally would be drawn in by him and want to care for him. He really seems like a guy that just hasn't had a good day in a while. Plus, family issues are never fun. Just when you almost feel like he could turn things around, you watch him suddenly explode at her and realize that if Sally were to accept him back into her life, there's no chance anything would change. I love the development between the two. It's shown that Sam has genuine devotion to Sally's acting, which she is desperate for, and it might have even been part of the reason they were together. But ultimately, his biggest character flaw is not seeing his own mistakes, and so he doesn't change and doesn't deserve to be around her. Superbly written, fantastically acted character relationship, but it looks like Barry really wants to involve himself in this. Barry is a psycho, so his first instinct when he sees a garbage person harassing his girlfriend is, oh, I must immediately kill this man. He spends a lot of the time being a mix between jealous and straight pissed, eventually landing on murder, driving to Sam's apartment, but backing off when he accidentally points the gun at Sally, and that moment is just, amazing payoff. Barry then goes to Gene's house and confesses that he killed an innocent person in the military in a blind rage in hopes of getting confirmation that people can change. Gene is kind of just like, whoa, my god, man, never say that to anyone ever again, but also, you're human. Barry, being Barry, instantly learns the wrong lessons from this, goes and tells Fuchs that he's ready to forget about all his murders, and instantly gets caught by Loach. I love how this ending just jumps on you. Fuchs and Loach are barely in this one, but Barry's own separate journey led him to this point, and never mind Loach just wants him to kill the guy who's cucking him. Well, What deals with so much at once in a way that's meant to feel overwhelming but still isn't too much. It's a perfectly compact story that smartly avoids cutting away to something unimportant, then delivers one of the most iconic and shocking endings of the show. I think it deserves its spot.
Responsible for leading 6 coups.
More like 4.5.
Okay, don't downplay your accomplishments. That's still a shitload of coups, Todd.
Season 4, Episode 7. A Nice Meal. This episode was refreshing. You know what a nice meal has? It's got bits. Dumb shit like Hank trying to blow up Fuchs' house with a single missile, then falling down a hill in his escape. And I haven't even mentioned that his previous attempt was the 4 ultimate badass killers, or FUBOCs for short, who are immediately returned to him as heads in boxes. All of these Hank scenes are comedic gold, and the missile scene has that season 4 spice of being wonderfully and creatively directed. This is the shit I've been looking for. I really enjoy how this one flows. Each piece feels cleverly woven together so that each character's separate actions cause them to get into the situations they end in. And I know that's like the description of a story, but it's done really well. Barry is interrogated by Jim Moss, who is honestly pretty underwhelming. He just takes a few notes and then walks off despite the hype for his appearance. During this, Gene is meeting with an agent who is helping to get the movie on Barry made, and is called by Sally, who he directs to his house, likely to interview her about her relationship with Barry or something like that. When she goes there, she and John are kidnapped by Hank, who gave up on killing Fuchs and now works for him. Meanwhile, Gene is baited by Jim Moss and the supposed agent into a trap. He's suspected for the murder of Janice now due to something Barry admitted to Jim earlier, and some clever callbacks to previous unfortunate events throughout the show that paint him as the bad guy. Finally, Hank, now holding Sally and John hostage, calls Barry, who has escaped as the rest of the plot is going on, and sets up the finale by forcing him to come rescue them. Each piece falls into place, each character moment is vital, everything makes sense and feels earned. The disconnected stories are connected now. Just what a penultimate episode needs to do. It may have had to rush a bit because of Season 4's structure, but it got everything in that it needed to get in. I only have a few issues. Barry himself is really underused here. He just stumbles around Jim Moss's house like a dumbass, and with the amount of episodes in the season that underuse Barry, the lead of the show, it's somewhat annoying. Then there's Jim, who I mentioned before as being underwhelming, but he's also wrong, and I can't stand for that. The development for Jim Moss's character always suggested to me that he was a cunning detective that would be the one to get revenge on Barry in the end, and him being wrong just doesn't work for me. It was a smart twist, I'll admit it. They stacked up a good amount of evidence, but not enough to believably trick that guy. Other than that, A Nice Meal is the Season 4 episode that I have the least gripes with, and the one I enjoyed watching the most. I can't deny this got me very excited. Unfortunately, that'll be the last placement the season gets, but I'll continue talking about it later nonetheless. Season 3, Episode 7, Candy Asses. I find Candy Asses to be one of the toughest episodes to write about. There's so much going on that I feel like I have to mention, but every time I start writing it becomes a plot summary, and then it goes on for like 2 pages. So instead, we're going to run through a super fast plot summary, then we'll talk. Barry has been poisoned, and after a vision of a beach, he is picked up by George Krempf, Ryan Madison's father. George laments to Barry about missing his son after having been extremely protective of him as Barry continues to dream, approaching the beach and realizing it is filled with the people he's killed. He awakens to find that George has sadly shot himself in his car after driving Barry to the hospital. Fuchs recruits Jim Moss, father of Janice Moss, an incredibly intimidating man, to take down Barry, but Jim instead gets him arrested and shares the information with the police. He and Albert, Barry's military buddy, both realize that Barry is the man they're looking for. Jim then visits Cousineau, who accidentally makes it clear that Barry is blackmailing him. Albert speaks to Fuchs, who reveals Barry's entire life story, including that he kills people, one of which was Chris, another military friend of theirs that we'll talk about in a bit. Albert takes his gun and leaves the station. Sally is jealous of Natalie for stealing her ideas for a separate show, so she has a huge outburst at her, and later, when Natalie leaks a video of their encounter, her agent, who drops her. Oh, and Hank gets shot with a tranquilizer, and it's hilarious. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk directing. There are multiple shots throughout the episode that prepare you for the dark you'll be staying in for a while. I really enjoy the shots on the daydreamed beach, but specifically the choice to show Barry's reaction to what sounds like a large boat arriving instead of pointing at, well, the boat, really works for me. The Barry POV shot as he's dragged away from the car is the only proof we have of George Krempf's death, but it feels all the more impactful for it only being a split second. Finally, during Sally's breakdowns, there are 2 separate callbacks to shots of Barry that subtly give you an idea of the turns her character will take in the coming episodes. Sarah Goldberg is also the performance I think I would shout out for this episode, as she emphasizes Sally's fall in a way that makes you feel conflicted on whether you should feel bad for her. Like, yeah, she sorta got what was coming to her, but it all happened so quickly, and there's so much forced mediocrity in her acting up to this point, and she's so manic that you can't help but want better for Sally. Michael Bofshever is my other favorite here. The man appears in only 3 episodes, I believe, and hits 2 super emotional scenes out of the park in only that time. The George Krempf scenes leave me speechless, but not because of how good they are, even if they are great. It's because you know it's coming. You can tell what's going to happen, and it's all the more depressing when it does. That's about it for Candy Asses, a title that makes this episode sound a lot funnier than it is. It's dark and creative, concluding with a fantastic finale setup. This is yet another episode of Barry doing nothing the whole time, however this one works as we go deeper into his thoughts in lieu of his words, and learn even more than we do in a typical episode. Plus, it is just nice to see some faces that have been gone for a while. Season 2, Episode 8. Berkman is greater than Block. We've got our second season finale, and as usual there's a lot to talk about. I'll start with Sally. Throughout this season, Sally has basically had one plot, and that is to plan out her performance portraying her and her ex, Sam, played by Barry. The script has gone every which way, from Sally standing up to Sam to being attacked by him, and back and forth and back and forth. The team has landed on revealing the truth, but Sally is indecisive and changes up on everyone on stage, slapping Barry and being praised, then surrounded by an awestruck audience. Sally's guilt for this decision is a common theme with her. This uncertain success where it always feels like she's got her life figured out, but only while living in a glass house. It's fascinating. The mixed emotions I feel, and obviously Sally feels, are so real. She's uncertain about what to do, but like Barry, she's gotten herself into a situation where nothing she can do will fully fix things, and she can't change her mind anymore. Whether it was the right choice or not, it's done. She can only react to it. Really good way to cap off this plot that is followed up on in Season 3, where Sally has become a semi-famous actress. Meanwhile, Barry tricks the police into releasing Kusino, who has been wrecked emotionally so hard that Henry Winkler ups his game for the entire rest of the show, then goes to get revenge on Fuchs for putting him in this situation in the first place. However, before that, he is told by Leo, Jean's son, that people can change for the better. Now keep in mind, Barry is not killed once in all of Season 2. He is taught to kill, he has tried to kill, but he is not killed. At this point in the series, he's probably closer than he ever has been to leaving his criminal life. It's starting to feel like we're going to have a relaxed, low-stakes, character-focused finale. Even Hank and Cristobal's gang war is called off when Fuchs arrives. But as soon as Hank calls Barry and gives him Fuchs' location, he drops everything and goes absolutely apeshit. He goes to the monastery where the gangs are located to find and kill Fuchs, mowing down others in the process, including Esther, who he poetically kills with the same golden bullet Hank wanted him to kill her with in the first place, and Merbeck, his previous protege that he kills in a blind rage. Merbeck even smiles when he sees Barry, assuming he couldn't be the one that's killing all of his friends. Up to this point, he's truly been a competent leader and gunman, so I don't believe that he was hesitating here, he just actually thought that Barry was there to help. While Barry is doing all this, Hank, Cristobal, Fuchs, and some of Hank's men escape, causing all of this to be pointless as Barry angrily walks off into the darkness. I love the camera work in this scene. There's so much movement during the violence, the blocking is just on point. It works in tandem with the sound. There's no music in this scene after Esther is shot, but with the amount of yelling and shuffling and gunshots, that doesn't matter. Each yell from Barry is accentuated with a slight echo and a quick pan across the room. It really is one of the best done scenes in all of Season 2, and one of the best episodes. This is the last we see of a decent Barry. For the next 2 seasons, he is practically irredeemable. People may still give him chances, but like Kusino, he's now broken. He fully had a chance to let it all go and try to be a better person, and he didn't. This happens a lot in the show, but the prime examples tend to be the finales. The message shown here is so impactful for Barry's character that it makes sense that the episode is named after him. This is defining. Season 3, Episode 6, 710 North. The Barry team put their all into 710 North because this episode is absolutely wild, as well as being one of the most entertaining and even rewatchable episodes of all 32. There's a ton of focus on Fuchs' attackers finally reaching Barry, yet with all the action going on, the comedy is still on point, and a delightful little twist is delivered at the end. I love when the show pulls the rug out from under you. And on top of all that, this is the Beignets by Mitch episode. Stylistically, 710 North adds a lot. The motorcycle chase with Taylor's sister and her group is such a big moment for establishing the recurring theme of action scenes that are not exactly realistic, but at the very least down-to-earth and immersive. Typical things happening in strange scenarios. A lot of the sequence is simply watching Barry drive around on a motorcycle, and sometimes the action is purposefully hidden from you, but the sound and look are so satisfying. I love the sounds of the cars driving by and that subtle camera movement upwards when Barry enters the highway. Everything about this feels original. While I liked the first 2 seasons, Season 3 is the one that set it apart from your usual criminal protagonist show, giving it its own identity. With Sally's story, though, it carries the energy of what came before, introducing yet another crazy Hollywood executive, this time played by Vanessa Bayer, who's wonderful, and Jesse Hodges, Sally's agent, does a great job of playing off of her. Sally's whole thing during the midsection of the season is just scene after scene of weird people in the film industry, and I'm down for that. We've been running with that shtick for 3 seasons. It still works. The most underrated section of this episode, though, is definitely Fuchs. Fuchs gets shot by Taylor's gang instantly and ends up being healed by these people on a cowboy ranch. Bill Hader really woke me up to how ridiculous this mini-story is on the Prestige TV podcast. Fuchs settles in with these people and is ready to turn his life around within a day. You're almost waiting for a tumbleweed to roll past. Stephen Root's delivery is so funny here, and the way he switches up as soon as he believes God himself is sending a sign for him to go after Barry makes me laugh harder each time. This brings about Jim Moss's introduction, who sort of works as this mysterious figure for a while. I don't even think we see his face at first, which is an aspect that weirdly blends well with this cowboy aesthetic. However, the thing that ties this whole episode together is the twist ending. Barry's whole plan for the single-day episode 6 takes place in is to buy beignets for Sharon, the wife of his late military friend Chris, which will be used at her party. After surviving the motorcycle gang just barely, he finally gets to her party and realizes no one else is there yet. The motocross guys were connected to Taylor, and Sharon has also been recruited by Fuchs. She knows he killed Chris, the beignets are poisoned, and the episode ends as Barry collapses to the ground. Really, it has everything. This is such an ambitious episode for Barry, featuring a full-length, long action sequence and rapidly changing tones, but it manages to balance it all. That's what the best parts of this show have. Balance. You've got continuations to some of the darkest moments we've seen in this whole series, confidently mixed with extras going through messy divorces. If this episode didn't present so many giant spoilers, I think this is the one I would show to someone to get them into Barry.
It's done.
Season 1, Episode 8. Know Your Truth. So here we have the first finale Barry ever had to create. One last episode before going on a hiatus is always a challenge, since there's so many elements to include in order to satisfy the viewer with something they haven't seen before, yet keep them around by leaving a few loose strands, a few unanswered questions. And with a show like this, you also have to write in the exits of major characters. If a series has a gang war in it, not everyone is making it out of a dramatic finale in one piece. Luckily, the show kinda has a thing for finales. I mean, 2 have placed in the top 10 and 1 is yet to come. It gives you major deaths with both Goran Pazar and Janice Moss providing that never-before-seen detail in the death of Goran, as he is shot in the head by Barry, but continues to flail his gun around, with his body functioning while his brain... not so much. Stuff like this has actually happened in real life, and choosing to depict it is super ambitious. Up to this point, the visuals have been sorta lackluster, with sets often seeming a bit too bright and TV-like. They aren't one of the lesser aspects of the show, but this episode is definitely a step up. That blood spurting out of Goran's head stuck with me ever since I first saw it. Additionally, the episode balances this drama with some funny-ass bits. Vacha's second brother trying to put Fuchs in the contraption, and also having a picture of Vacha in his pocket that he just carries around with him is hilarious to me. And the police concluding that the Chechen-Bolivian War was masterminded by 2 guys who never met is more and more bizarre each time I think about it. But okay, we still have lots of time left in the episode, and after Fuchs is freed, we enter this dreamlike sequence at Cousineau's lake house. Everyone seems to think it's dreamlike, including me, and I think that's a mix of us being used to dreams in Season 1 and how strangely perfect everything feels. Sally and Barry are together again, having dinner with Jean and Janice Moss, who are also together, but there's a Barry Berkman cycle to acknowledge, and that is, Barry is ready to leave his criminal life behind, someone finds out about his secrets, he kills him. This time it's Janice, who connects him to his victims through Facebook after Jean offhandedly mentions his monologue at the start of the season, and before Barry kills her, he gives the most genuine attempt to save himself he can manage. He's hidden a gun, so he knows one of them isn't making it out of this, meaning this is the best he's got, and it's awful. He tries to convince Janice that he's a good guy because he stopped being a hitman for a few weeks. He also tries to straight up manipulate her by subtly pointing out that arresting him would cause this perfect dream to fall apart. By this point, many would still see Barry as redeemable, but this ending starts to make the cycle more apparent, as well as the fact that it's Barry himself causing it. Janice's death isn't one that just goes away. It is investigated by many, and multiple times it comes back to bite Barry hard. One of those times was... Season 2, Episode 5, Ronnie/Lily. Despite this being the third highest ranked episode of the whole show, I don't have nearly as much to say about this one as I do about others up here. It's kind of the show's magnum opus, but it's also kind of not important to most other things going on. This entire episode is Barry and Fuchs carrying out one subplot, while the rest of the characters do fuck all. But it really is one of the funniest, if not the funniest episode of the whole show. Barry is hired by Loach to assassinate his ex-wife's new boyfriend, Ronnie Proxon. But Ronnie turns out to be a martial arts expert that beats the shit out of Barry. Eventually, Barry overcomes Ronnie, but then Lily, his daughter, shows up, who is basically a rabid dog trained to attack, and she starts knifing Barry in the shoulder and jumps over a bunch of fences. She's an animal. Barry and Fuchs regroup and try to deal with her. Hijinks ensue. And then those hijinks ramp up until you're not even sure if Lily is of this world. Lily's actress, Jessie Giacomassi, being found for this role was a miracle. I genuinely don't think there's a person on Earth who could make this one-episode character so dynamic and memorable that she's still popular in the fanbase to this day. By the end of this episode, both Ronnie and Loach are dead, and Lily is never to be seen again. It's a hell of a trip. The unique thing with this episode is that it's all in real time. From Barry's perspective, this all happens in 30 minutes. He does go to sleep for like 8 hours at one point, but we don't see that. That, mixed with the directing of certain shots, which are often wide and prolonged, makes everything feel even more surreal and almost nightmarish than it already is, but not in an actually off-putting way. Across the entire show, this is probably the worst day of Barry's life. On the non-jokey side of things, this episode includes some really important and nice flashbacks to the first time Barry and Fuchs met. This is their episode after all, and Barry returning to Fuchs in the same way that he returned to him after the military is a great parallel. He just can't escape that little asshole. He's too attached to him by this point in the series. Fuchs is consistently dragging Barry down with him, but in Barry's mind, leaving him behind is not something he can currently live with. He will inevitably track him down and kill him, or stick at his side, because he doesn't know anything else. That's about it for Ronnie Lily. Hell of a good time. You won't believe it till you see it.
And then I'm gonna keep my fat trap shut. And then, I promise you, no one will ever know any. Wait.
Season 1, Episode 7. Loud, fast, and keep going. When I was first watching Barry, I didn't know they could do this. I liked episodes 5 and 6, I thought they were good, but this hit me like a truck. Sally, or rather Sarah Goldberg, takes on the challenge of performing Macbeth's iconic Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow monologue. There's a small section to set up her success afterwards where she uses a stupid accent and doesn't seem confident, and then it all changes when she's surprised by Barry's emotion as Macbeth's random messenger boy, or whatever, that gives her the push she needed for her harsh inflection, eyes looking into hell as the camera allows her to go through it all in one unbroken close-up. It's the culmination of Sally's lifelong passion. She's been unafraid to show her talent to even those who don't care to see it, and this is the point where she thinks she made it. But this poor girl does not know what she's in for. Unfortunately for her, this is wrapped up in so much more. Taylor and Vaughn are dead, but Barry's other military buddy, Chris, is still alive, and Barry needs to figure out how to deal with him. He and Chris are able to escape the newly arrived Bolivians, including Cristobal making his first appearance. Afterwards, he's thought dead by Fuchs and the Chechens, meaning he can safely return to his acting career, but it's just not working out with the stress on his brain. I have to praise Bill Hader just as much as Sarah Goldberg, because it totally could have been annoying for one of the last episodes of the season to pull back on the intensity. After all the bloodshed and near death and frantic yelling, Barry's just gonna recite some lines. Without Barry feeling on edge and so unbelievably freaked out, this could be a low point, but that's what Hader brings. Also, Chris won't stop calling him. There's some stuff about Ryan Madison. No matter what, the episode will not let you forget about the worrying backdrop to this line reading. Chris calls him out to meet in some random park and says he's going to talk to the police. Chris Lucado, played by Chris Marquette, only is in the show for a few episodes, and he might just be the best minor character the show has ever had. He leaves a major mark as he is smart and observant but also anxious out of his mind, leading him to make several mistakes during the conversation. He lets slip that he lied to his wife about where he was going, meaning nobody currently knows he is with Barry, and because of this, the two both realize what is about to happen. Barry's screams of pain over having to kill an innocent friend of his are actually really frightening, but it's hard to feel bad for him. The way he carries out this kill is still businesslike, framing it as a suicide and formally getting out of the car, hands in pockets, emotionlessly walking off without a moment where he puts his head in his hands or yells, "Why, God, why?" He cares, but he knows he can't. This is something that's going to haunt him, but he still did it. It's one of the best scenes of the show. The layers to every word, which are much thinner and obvious on Chris's side, even the silence when an unknown truck pulls up that could potentially be a threat, ending the only way you know it has to, breaks my heart. Every time I see Chris in a scene before this, I can't help but think about how it ends. For the rest of the episode, Barry's daydreams through Season 1 turn to daymares. As he is about to go on stage, he experiences an overload of emotions as he imagines Sharon Lucado and her son grieving Chris's death, and this is yet again one of my favorite scenes of the show. The editing of these tiny clips so that they repeat and switch placements echoes the feeling of his mind rapidly running wild. I haven't experienced PTSD, but I've experienced panic and anxiety attacks, and yeah, that's what it's like. Barry delivers his one line with such raw emotion that Gene and Sally are both ecstatic with him afterwards, not knowing that the worst thing he did that he reached deep inside himself for happened only hours ago, and he'll be paying for it for the next few seasons. Episode 7 feels more like Episode 8 Part 1, since it's very much climactic, and yet it exists partially to wrap up the stories for some characters so that Episode 8 doesn't have to be jam-packed. You don't get much with Sally after this. Goran and Hank don't interact much after this, so I'm happy to say that their scenes here are really funny. Loud, Fast, and Keep Going is relentless, but I think there's a world where it was just fine, or just as good as 5 and 6, because it didn't need to be this fantastic to be effective. Something like Chris's death could have been just as sad as Paco's from Episode 3, and still worked. But this must have been a good day on set because the episode is electric. Also, Liz Sarnoff writes for every single one of the Episode 7s for Barry, and she has to be one of my favorite writers for the show. And that was my favorite Barry episode, with my favorite Barry scene, for a while. Until this happened.
But this has to stop. All of it's got to stop. You hear me? Just starting now.
Season 3, Episode 8. You already heard the title, let's talk. I feel like I have to justify why this very serious, no-jokes episode is the best of them all, while Season 4, the very serious, no-jokes season, is the worst, and it's because Season 3's ending feels necessary and conclusive. This is that last chance. That final time that Barry can change things for the better. After this, his morality isn't in question. We know he's a psychopath, and I personally just don't think we need to keep going. Season 4 is basically Barry cheating the system so that he can continue to have a normal life. Like, no man, you lost, we're done. Plus, by this point, we mostly understand character flaws in the other main players, and by the end of Season 4, they are about the same, or changed a little bit, and in my opinion, for the worse. Sally is too forgiving of Barry due to her past in abusive relationships, and being around him has made her a worse person. Hank is unable to preserve his innocence in a criminal life. Starting Now gives a much subtler realization to those people, while Season 4 hits them on the head with a hammer and screams in their ears, your life sucks, you're a bad person. Okay, it's not that bad, like, I don't hate Season 4, but in comparison, this is just so much better to me. Barry dying feels so much more wrong than Barry going to prison, and him getting a quote-unquote good ending is just less fitting. He was never smart enough to trick all of these people, he just got lucky. That could be interesting, but it never felt like what the show was leading towards. Because of that, Season 4 never satisfied me the way this finale did. Sally has scenes sprinkled throughout the episode that emphasize and reveal to her what her relationship with Barry is. He literally tells her what it is, having just come off of George Crumph's suicide, and now understanding the impact he has on people that aren't even his targets, and he lets her know that he doesn't want to drag her down with him. Unfortunately, it's a bit too late, as the only survivor of the motocross gang is back to finish the job, and knocks out Barry almost immediately before strangling Sally. I appreciate that this scene is so harshly brutal. There's nothing calculated about this, it's messy. Sally gets smacked to the ground and has the life choked out of her, all with no dialogue or music. We're forced to just sit with it. Sally's face gets progressively more dead, and by this point in the show, it could happen. Before, I completely disregarded Fuchs getting shot because there was no way that would be how he died, but we're in the home stretch of this season, and it's fully possible. Instead, she gives the guy a knife through the back of the head into his eye and beats him to death in the soundproof stage, which allows for a perfect transition to Barry waking back up. Yet again, just like in the last placement, there's a close-up on Sarah Goldberg for the entirety of the scene, while Barry attempts to get her to disassociate, inadvertently becoming her Lady Macbeth. As the episode began, we saw Sally and Jean in Barry's victim beach, and one of those nightmares just came true. Later on, Sally leaves Barry for Joplin without telling him, finally escaping the chaos of her life to rediscover herself. I really wish they actually did something interesting with this, but whatever, I think it's a fantastic ending. Just like Barry, she has dug herself a hole that she can never fully get out of, but while she's only 6 feet down, he's reaching the Earth's core, so she at least gets to go home even if she'll never not be fucked up again. I think by now, Bill Hader not only knew how talented Sarah Goldberg was, but how he could use her. NoHo Hank's section of the story all happens in the middle, throughout one extended scene. This begins when Akmal and Yandar escape their handcuffs in the other cell, before getting absolutely eviscerated by a fucking panther, in the only scene that toes the line of being too much. Like, this is practically a gross-out scene, with how much we see bones crunching in the subtitles, but it is very effective for getting across that Hank did not think it could be this bad, because we didn't even know it could be this bad. This moment is shocking because up to this point, Hank has felt pretty safe. His conflicts are scary, but there's always some comedic relief to it. Batir finding him hiding behind the painting in the monastery, Barry's ridiculous bomb shenanigans when blowing up Fernando, the cops versus Bolivians conflict when his greenhouse gets raided. Here, there's nothing funny. Hank finally has to step up and be the leader instead of the right-hand man. So he kills the panther, breaks out of the cell, and confronts Cristobal's wife Elena and her weird dancing shadow man. Elena barely gets any time on screen, so this last moment has to count, and it does when you translate what she's saying. This whole scene is some weird conversion therapy to get him to love her again, but it doesn't feel like it's out of hatred. She's literally trying to reprogram something that isn't there, trying to get back something that she's already lost, just like nearly everyone in the show. Hank kills her, taking his first life of the entire series and officially losing his innocence. Some people didn't even think Cristobal was alive when Hank was holding him. This is a lot for Hank of all people to take on, but Anthony Carrigan came to play, and because of how good he is in his sequence, they didn't push it into the territory of feeling dark for the sake of it to get the message across. Admittedly, this story isn't fully concluded, as there's very little resolution, but I'll get to that later. So Barry Berkman has a body to bury. Sally killed the motocross guy, and he's decided to take the blame for it, so we return to where the season began. While he's there though, Albert arrives. He knows everything, he's ready to take Barry in. But Barry doesn't even know if he's real. This is my favorite scene in the series. James Hiroyuki Liao is the only person in competition with Chris Marquette for Best Minor Performance. He brings Barry down to a desperate, broken, terrified man who just doesn't want to lose his life. There's no reason for Barry to believe Albert is actually there, so he probably believes he's fully gone off the deep end. His past coming back to haunt him and show him how bad it's gotten, or possibly the literal representation of God when Albert gives him a second chance, hoping he'll redeem himself this time because he can't punish what he's been reduced to. I think no matter what, a little bit of Albert is just Barry himself when he delivers the line that only Barry would recognize, starting now, and walks off leaving Barry on the ground. That shot, man, unbelievable. The music, unthinkable. This scene and what Barry does afterwards is his inescapable cycle. Let's go backwards. One of the first scenes in the episode is Cousineau speaking to Jim Moss. Jim now knows that Barry is blackmailing Gene, but he wants him, even needs him, to say it. So being experienced in this stuff from his military time, he brings him to his garage and interrogates him. Barry is scary, but he'll never be as scary as Jim. With increasingly aggressive tones, he repeats questions. You love my daughter. Do you love Barry Berkman? Eventually his chair scrapes over and he gets right in Gene's face, screaming at him, breaking him to tears like Barry. Robert Ray Wisdom's performance could easily usurp Chris and Albert as the best minor character, but he feels too major to be included there. The directing of this scene, the slow zoom on Gene's face just to get that surprise out of the audience when Jim moves in for the kill, is phenomenal. This is at the beginning before any other scenes I've called fantastic, so this sets the table. Then, the entire episode goes by. Barry gets a call. It's Jim Moss. He's never spoken to this man before, but he's trying to get out of town as quickly as possible, so as soon as Janice is mentioned, he's done. He hangs up. He gets another call. It's Gene. He's met with Jim. He's ready to kill him. Barry is terrified. This would be his second nightmare fulfilled, so he has to deal with it. Now this is fair. Barry does not want Gene to murder this man, and he especially doesn't want him to fail to do so if he tries. He arrives and takes the gun. This is the moment. There is no threat. Gene can no longer kill Jim, and Barry has tied up his loose ends. He can walk away. He doesn't. He goes into the house, he pulls the gun, he's caught. Gene knows Barry, and he knew he would go for the kill even if he didn't need to. Barry has had a million second chances, and this was the last straw. I love that it's truly a mix of Barry's rage and evilness and his need to protect Gene. That second nightmare just couldn't come true. He doesn't hate Jim, he doesn't even know him. He was there to, in his eyes, save Cousineau, but he doesn't realize how much he's already damaged him. And the way the episode opens, the first scene in the previously on, Gene Cousineau's masterclass. Janice Moss's murder has been solved and the show can end here. But it doesn't. It keeps going. And you know, I think that makes some sense. This is not fully over. Hank's not done. Fuchs definitely isn't done. We need a bit more. I think 1 episode more. Barry has always been restricted to 8 episodes, but I think we should have had 9, or they should have extended this one. A resolution in which Hank shows that he's hardened somewhat, Sally shows that she's still devoted to Barry despite everything, and Barry and Fuchs meet in prison to finalize their relationship. A full season? No, that's when you start to make up reasons for the series to continue. I believe that all we needed was Season 3, Episode 9. To end things off, there are some nice touches in this finale that I would like to mention. The intro clip is a soundbite of Jim Moss's TV at the end, that's cool. The knife Sally kills the motocross guy with is the one Barry brings into the room when he thinks there's an intruder, that's cool. Hank uses Barry's technique from Season 2 to disarm the guard in his cell, that's cool. Hell, when Barry goes into Jim Moss's house, Gene says, "Don't go in there, don't go in there." So many awesome writing choices that when you realize them, you're like, oh. Plus, this episode isn't without jokes. Annie's play being Chrome Fuck Number 9 is so ridiculous, and you get no elaboration for it. Fuchs barely shows up here, but when he does, you get both "I'm the Raven" and the police chief saying Albert pulled out his gun in front of them to go see the sights. It's still funny as hell when it wants to be. Starting Now is built up to flawlessly with increasingly depressing episodes before it blasts you with intensely disturbing moments one after another that each feel correct and conclusive. And it's my favorite episode of the whole damn show, thank you very much. Wow. Okay, we're done. That's 32 episodes. Well, thanks. Barry was one of the first shows I really got into, and you may think that sounds stupid, but you gotta understand, I'm a little boy. I grew up watching Teen Titans Go instead of Teen Titans. This show is special to me, and there are portions of it that I don't love, but I like it enough to talk about it for this long. Plus, I've listened to podcasts, I've read articles, and so on. I care about this show, I know about this show, and I'm glad I got to share my thoughts. When Bill Hader inevitably makes a horror movie, I'll be down for that, and if you want to see me review it, stick around and subscribe if you're cool. Barry is a series that shows a filmmaker progress into a new style, and goddammit, I love seeing great things come from unexpected places. I might have already said that, but that just shows that I really do. I'm thinking about it a lot. Anyways, I don't exactly know how to end this. I'm kinda done doing what I wanted to do. Like the video. Bye.